Ravenscraft Manor still stands, its marble facade gleaming coldly beneath the gray skies of Newport. To the casual observer, it is a monument to wealth and refinement, an architectural jewel perched on the cliffs, overlooking the restless Atlantic. But beneath its polished surface lies a darkness so profound that it has been buried for over a century, whispered only in hushed tones by those who dare remember. Within these walls, 7 men met mysterious ends, their deaths marked by violent convulsions, blackened nails, and the faint, bitter scent of arsenic. The poison was silent, invisible, and deadly, and the hand that wielded it was not that of a stranger, but of a mother. What if the most dangerous monster in this story was the one who should have protected her own children? What if the very person entrusted with love and care became the architect of betrayal and death? Ravenscraft Manor is not just a house. It is a tomb of secrets, a stage for a chilling drama of ambition, manipulation, and murder. This is the story of Margaret Aldridge, a woman whose maternal devotion twisted into something far more sinister, a calculated quest for power that shattered the bonds of family and stained the pages of history with blood. As we unravel the layers of this dark tale, ask yourself, what makes a family deadly? Is it the poison in their veins or the poison in their hearts? Share your thoughts below and prepare to step inside a world where love and murder are disturbingly intertwined. Newport in the early 1860s was a city caught between two worlds, a gilded cage shimmering with opulence, yet shadowed by the gathering storm of civil war. The streets were lined with grand mansions, their white columns and sweeping verandas a testament to the fortunes amassed through textile mills, shipping empires, and international trade. Bellevue Avenue, the city's crown jewel, was a parade of architectural marvels, palatial summer homes that rivaled the estates of European nobility. Here, the American aristocracy flaunted their wealth with lavish balls, elegant dinners, and social rituals that reinforced their place atop a fragile hierarchy. But beneath the glittering surface, Newport was a city on edge. The nation was fracturing, and the distant thunder of war echoed even in these privileged enclaves. The industrial North raced for conflict with the agrarian South, and the uncertainty seeped into every conversation, every whispered worry behind closed doors. For families like the Aldridges, the stakes were more than political, they were existential. Their vast fortune, built on the mercantile success of Edmund Aldridge, was threatened by the shifting tides of war and economic instability. The shipping routes that fed their wealth were vulnerable, and the social order that had elevated them was beginning to crack. The Aldridge family stood as a pillar of Newport society, their 40-room Ravenscraft Manor a symbol of their power and prestige. Built with Italian marble, French crystal chandeliers, and mahogany imported from the Caribbean, the estate was a fortress of luxury overlooking the Atlantic. Yet, within its walls, the veneer of respectability concealed a darker reality. Margaret Aldridge, the family matriarch, had assumed control after Edmund's untimely death, navigating the treacherous waters of society with a cold, calculating grace. Her daughters, Ella Lenina and Catherine, were the future she sought to secure, their marriages carefully orchestrated to preserve the family's standing. In this gilded cage, appearances were everything. The Aldridges maintained a facade of unity and prosperity, but beneath the surface, ambition, fear, and desperation festered. The looming war was not the only threat. The true danger lay within the family itself, where love and loyalty were twisted into weapons, and the pursuit of power would lead to betrayal and death. As we delve deeper into the story of Ravenscraft Manor, remember, in Newport's gilded cage, the brightest lights often cast the darkest shadows. Margaret Aldridge was the kind of woman who commanded a room without uttering a word. At 47, she carried herself with the poised elegance of a queen, her tall, slender frame draped in somber silks that whispered of mourning and mystery. Her steel gray eyes, sharp and calculating, seemed to pierce through the facades of those around her, weighing their worth with cold precision. Dark hair streaked prematurely with silver framed a face that was striking, not for softness or warmth, but for its austere beauty, an unyielding mask that concealed the storm beneath. To Newport society, Margaret was the grieving widow, a woman who had lost her husband Edmund in a tragic riding accident 3 years prior. She was admired for her composure, her sharp intellect, and her deft management of the Aldridge fortune. In a world where women were expected to be ornamental and obedient, Margaret was an anomaly, a matriarch who wielded power with quiet authority. She was respected, even feared, a figure who seemed to embody the very essence of Victorian dignity and restraint. But behind the polished veneer lay a far darker truth. Margaret was not merely a widow preserving her family's legacy. She was a predator cloaked in mourning. Her intelligence was not tempered by compassion, but sharpened by ruthless ambition. Every decision she made, every smile she offered, was calculated to secure her position and expand her influence. The same hands that arranged lavish weddings and hosted elegant soirees were capable of far more sinister acts. Margaret's empire was built on secret whispers of poison, carefully concealed lies, and a chilling willingness to eliminate anyone who threatened her control. She understood the fragile nature of power, especially for a woman in her position, and she was prepared to do whatever it took to protect it. The deaths that had already stained Ravenscraft Manor were no accidents. They were the carefully executed moves of a master strategist. As the story unfolds, the contrast between Margaret's public image and her private reality becomes stark. The woman who appeared to mourn her husband with grace was, in truth, orchestrating a deadly game of survival and dominance. Her cold beauty was a mask, her intelligence a weapon, and her ambition a darkness that would consume everything and everyone in its path. The question is not if Margaret Aldridge was dangerous, but how far she was willing to go to secure her empire. Charles Whitfield arrived in Newport like a breath of fresh air, tall, confident, and impeccably groomed, with the easy charm of a man born into privilege. At 26, he carried the polished manners of a Harvard-educated lawyer and the quiet assurance of someone destined for greatness. His family, rooted in Boston's textile industry and political circles, represented exactly the kind of alliance the Aldridges needed to secure their fragile future. To the outside world, his engagement to Ella Lanina, Aldridge was a perfect match to young heirs, poised to unite their fortunes and strengthen their social standing. Ella Lanina, at 23, was everything Newport society admired in a young woman: graceful, accomplished, and gentle in disposition. Her beauty was understated, her manners impeccable, and her reputation spotless. She had been raised to embody the ideals of her class-obedient, refined, and ready to marry well. The announcement of their engagement in early 1861 was met with celebration and approval. It was a union that promised stability, wealth, and the continuation of two powerful family legacies. But beneath the surface of this seemingly ideal match lay currents far more complex and far more dangerous. Margaret Aldridge watched Charles with a gaze that was anything but maternal. From the moment he arrived at Ravenscraft Manor, she saw in him not just a future son-in-law, but an opportunity. His substantial inheritance, his legal expertise, and his connections to Boston's elite made him a prize far greater than any mere fiancé. Margaret's interest in Charles was calculated, her attentions carefully measured to draw him closer, to bind him to her will. While Ella Lanina dreamed of a future filled with love and security, Margaret was already weaving a web of manipulation. The engagement was no longer just a social contract. It was the first move in a deadly game. Charles, unaware of the shadows lurking behind Margaret's polite smiles, was stepping into a trap disguised as a promise. As the wedding plans unfolded, so too did the sinister intentions of the woman who would stop at nothing to secure her empire, even if it meant betraying her own blood. The evening air at Ravenscraft Manor was thick with the scent of salt and blooming gardenias, the moon casting a pale glow over the manicured grounds. Inside, the grand drawing room was warm and inviting, but beneath the polished veneer, a darker game was unfolding. Charles Whitfield, still new to the rhythms of Newport society, found himself drawn into Margaret Aldridge's carefully orchestrated world, a world where every gesture, every word, was a calculated move on a chessboard he barely understood. Margaret had invited Charles to the terrace that night under the pretense of discussing wedding arrangements and family finances. The brandy she poured was rich and smooth, its amber depths catching the candlelight as she handed him a glass. What Charles did not know was that the drink was laced with a subtle sedative, just enough to dull his senses, to lower his defenses without raising suspicion. The effect was gradual, a creeping haze that softened his thoughts and blurred the lines between caution and desire. As they spoke, Margaret's voice was a silken thread weaving through the night, drawing Charles closer with every carefully chosen word. She listened intently as he confessed his anxieties, the pressure of the impending war, doubts about his career, fears of inadequacy. With each revelation, she positioned herself as the only person who truly understood him, the only one who could offer solace in a world that seemed increasingly uncertain. Charles found himself responding in ways that surprised him. The sharp legal mind that had once prided itself on clarity and reason now wavered under Margaret's gaze. Her presence was intoxicating, her touch light but deliberate, a hand resting just a moment too long on his arm, a laugh that lingered in the air like a secret. The sedative in his brandy dulled his judgment, but it was Margaret's skillful manipulation that ensnared him, planting seeds of confusion and desire that would grow into something far more dangerous. He struggled with guilt, the knowledge that his feelings were misplaced, that the woman before him was his fiancée's mother. Yet the haze clouding his mind made it difficult to resist, and the warmth of Margaret's attention filled a void he hadn't realized existed. The night stretched on, a delicate dance of power and vulnerability, until Margaret withdrew just as Charles teetered on the edge of a line he dared not cross. As he stumbled back into the house, the cool night air did little to clear the fog in his mind. Questions gnawed at him. What had just happened? Why did he feel both drawn to and repelled by Margaret? And most unsettling of all, what was she truly after? The answers lay hidden in the shadows of Ravenscraft Manor, waiting to be uncovered. But one thing was certain. Charles was no longer the man who had arrived in Newport. Something inside him had shifted, and the consequences would be far-reaching and devastating. Edmund Aldridge's death had been accepted by Newport society as a tragic accident, riding mishap that claimed the life of a respected patriarch. The official story was simple: a fall from his horse during a routine ride, injuries severe enough to end his days within weeks. But beneath the surface of this accepted narrative lay troubling inconsistencies that only a few dared to whisper about. The convulsions that racked Edmund in his final days, the darkening of his fingernails, and the faint, bitter scent that lingered in the air were symptoms that no one at the time fully understood. To most, they were dismissed as the natural consequences of trauma. To others, they were the first signs of something far more sinister. Thomas Richardson, Ella-Lanin's former fiancé, had met an equally mysterious end. A skilled horseman and a man of robust health, Thomas's death in a carriage accident seemed almost impossible. His horses, known for their calm demeanor, had panicked without cause on a clear evening, sending the carriage careening into a fatal crash. Friends and family struggled to reconcile the tragedy with a man they knew strong, cautious, and in full control of his surroundings. Yet, like Edmund's death, Thomas's demise was quietly accepted, buried beneath layers of grief and social expectation. It was Dr. William Hensley, the Aldridge family physician, who first voiced the doubts that would unravel the carefully constructed facade. a man weathered by decades of medical practice. Hensley had attended Edmund during his final illness and had been troubled by the symptoms he observed. Though he had initially attributed them to internal injuries from the fall, whispers from colleagues and new medical insights began to cast a shadow over that conclusion. Poisoning, specifically arsenic, was a possibility that could no longer be ignored. Hensley's concerns, however, were tempered by the social realities of the time. Accusing a prominent family of murder was unthinkable, and so his suspicions remained largely unspoken, confined to private conversations and cautious inquiries. Meanwhile, Charles Whitfield's legal scrutiny of the Aldridge estate revealed a pattern that deepened the mystery. As he pored over wills, insurance policies, and property deeds, he noticed a series of abrupt changes made by Edmund in the months before his death changes that disproportionately favored Margaret Aldridge. These alterations, combined with the timing of the deaths, suggested a calculated effort to consolidate wealth and power. Charles's discoveries were unsettling, but what troubled him most was the realization that these deaths were not isolated incidents. The same pattern of sudden, suspicious fatalities surrounded the Aldridge family like a dark cloud. Truth and deception wove a tangled web within Ravenscraft Manor. The public narrative of accidents and misfortune masked a reality steeped in betrayal and cold calculation. Margaret, Aldridge's carefully maintained image of a grieving widow, was beginning to crack under the weight of these revelations. As Charles grappled with the implications of what he had uncovered, the line between justice and complicity blurred. The past was no longer a closed chapter. It was a living, breathing threat, poised to consume everyone caught in its shadow. Margaret Aldridge's web of deception tightened with a precision that left no room for error. What had begun as subtle manipulation soon evolved into a calculated conspiracy, one that would bind Charles Whitfield irrevocably to her dark designs. The man who had arrived in Newport with a clear sense of honor and purpose was now ensnared in a labyrinth of seduction, betrayal, and murder, his moral compass shattered beneath the weight of Margaret's relentless ambition. It started with whispered conversations behind closed doors, where Margaret revealed fragments of her truth to Charles' carefully curated confessions that painted her as a desperate woman forced into unspeakable acts. She spoke of Edmund's cruelty, of financial ruin looming over the family, and of the necessity to protect her daughters at any cost. But beneath the veneer of victimhood lay a far more chilling reality: Margaret's willingness to eliminate anyone who threatened her empire, even if that meant her own flesh and blood. Charles, already compromised by the night of drugged brandy and psychological seduction, found himself drawn deeper into Margaret's orbit. His initial resistance crumbled as she skillfully exploited his guilt and confusion, convincing him that silence and complicity were the only paths to safeguarding Elenina and Catherine. The legal expertise he brought to the table became a tool for Margaret's deadly plans, drafting wills, manipulating documents, and orchestrating the perfect accidents that would erase threats without suspicion. The most harrowing aspect of Margaret's scheme was her readiness to sacrifice her daughters. Elenina, with her growing suspicions and dangerous curiosity, was the first to be marked. Margaret's cold pragmatism saw her not as a beloved child, but as a liability, someone who could unravel everything if left unchecked. Catherine, though younger and less aware, was not spared from the shadow of suspicion. Margaret's vision was ruthless. To secure the family fortune and her own power, she would remove anyone who stood in her way, no matter the cost. Charles's descent into complicity was gradual, but inexorable. The man who once dreamed of a future built on love and justice now found himself drafting the legal frameworks for murder. Each document he prepared, each secret meeting he attended, chipped away at his conscience. He rationalized his actions as necessary evils, convinced by Margaret's manipulations that he was protecting the family rather than destroying it. Yet beneath the surface, a growing horror festered, a recognition that he was no longer a bystander, but an active participant in a deadly conspiracy. Margaret's cold smile and steely gaze became the axis around which Charles's world revolved. Their alliance was a twisted dance of power and submission, seduction and control. She promised him safety, influence, and a place beside her in the empire she was building, even as she prepared to discard him when he outlived his usefulness. The lines between love, lust, and fear blurred until Charles could no longer distinguish his own desires from the poison that coursed through Ravenscroft Manor. As the plan unfolded, the stakes grew higher and the shadows lengthened. The house that once symbolized wealth and security was now a prison of secrets and lies, where trust was a weapon and betrayal the currency of survival. Margaret Aldridge had become a queen of darkness, and Charles Whitfield, her unwilling king. Together, they stood on the precipice of destruction, their fates entwined in a deadly game from which there was no escape. The night air hung heavy with tension, as Elalina crept silently through the shadowed halls of Ravenscroft Manor, clutching the leather portfolio that held the damning evidence against her mother. Every creak of the ancient floorboards echoed like a gunshot in her ears, each breath a fragile thread in the fragile web of her escape plan. Behind her, the house seemed to pulse with a malevolent life, as if the very walls conspired to trap her within their cold marble grasp. Margaret Aldridge's presence was a dark shadow looming over every corner of the estate. The woman who had once been a distant, commanding figure had transformed into something far more terrifying, a predator stripped of pretense, driven by desperation and rage. Elalina's heart pounded not just with fear, but with the bitter sting of betrayal. The mother who should have been her protector was now her greatest threat. Suddenly, footsteps sharp, deliberate resounded from the grand staircase. Catherine's voice, low and urgent, whispered from the darkness. "Elalina, we don't have much time." "She knows." The sisters met in the dim light of the library, eyes wide with a mixture of terror and resolve. Margaret's footsteps grew louder, closer, her voice slicing through the silence like a blade. "You think you can run from me? From what I've built? From the truth I've buried?" Elalina's hands trembled as she clutched the portfolio tighter. "Why, Mother? Why destroy us? We're your daughters." Margaret's laugh was cold, devoid of warmth. "Daughters? You are liabilities, threats to everything I've sacrificed. I gave you life, and you repay me with suspicion and defiance." The confrontation spiraled swiftly into chaos. Margaret lunged forward, her eyes blazing with fury, but Catherine intercepted her, wielding an iron poker from the fireplace. The heavy metal struck Margaret's temple with a sickening thud, sending her sprawling to the floor, blood blossoming across her pale skin. For a moment, silence reigned, broken only by ragged breaths and the distant howl of the wind. Then, the sharp clatter of a dropped revolver echoed through the room. Margaret's scream shattered the stillness, a raw primal sound that spoke of rage and pain intertwined. "Run!" Catherine urged, grabbing Elalina's arm. Before she recovers. The sisters fled through the labyrinthine corridors, the mansion's grandeur now a maze of shadows and threats. Behind them, Margaret's enraged cries chased them like a storm, relentless and unforgiving. The heavy thud of boots and the clatter of weapons signaled that Charles had joined the pursuit, his face a mask of conflicted loyalty and fear. Outside, the night was a cloak of darkness, the moon a pale witness to their desperate flight. Horses waited at the stable, the restless neighs a frantic chorus urging haste. Elalina and Catherine mounted swiftly, hearts hammering as they spurred their mounts into a gallop, hooves pounding against the gravel like thunder. Behind them, the manor's windows flared with light as servants and guards scrambled to respond. The chase was on. The sisters urged their horses faster, the cold wind whipping through their hair, the scent of salt and earth mingling with the acrid fear that burned in their lungs. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every rustle a promise of capture. Yet ahead lay the town of Fragile Sanctuary, where they might find justice, or at least a chance to survive. But the distance closed rapidly. Figures emerged from the darkness, horses thundering in pursuit, their riders shouting commands that pierced the night. Margaret's voice rose above them all, a chilling promise of vengeance. You cannot escape what you've uncovered. The truth will die with you. Elalonina glanced back, eyes wide with terror. The gap was shrinking. The manor, once a symbol of safety and home, now loomed behind them like a tomb. As the sisters raced toward the uncertain safety of Newport's town square, the world seemed to hold its breath. Would they outrun the darkness that hunted them? Or would Ravenscraft Manor claim them as it had so many before? The answer lay just beyond the horizon, shrouded in the night's unforgiving embrace. The courtroom was packed to the rafters, the air thick with anticipation and whispered gossip. Newport's elite had gathered not merely to witness a trial, but to watch the unraveling of one of their own, a woman who had once been the very embodiment of grace and power, now accused of cold-blooded murder. Margaret Aldridge entered the room with the same composed dignity that had defined her public life, her black silk gown flowing like a shadow behind her. Her steel-gray eyes scanned the crowd, unflinching, betraying no hint of remorse or fear. To many, she was a chilling enigma, a mother who had poisoned her way to power, yet maintained an unshakable facade of innocence. The prosecution laid bare the horrifying details. Arsenic found in the bodies of Edmund Aldridge and Thomas Richardson, the suspicious timing of wills and insurance policies, and the damning evidence uncovered by Elalonina and Catherine. Witnesses testified to Margaret's cold demeanor and the strange illnesses that had plagued the family. The most devastating blow came with the reading of Charles Whitfield's confession, a document penned in the solitude of a jail cell, revealing the depths of his manipulation and complicity. He described how Margaret had seduced him, drugged him, and drawn him into a conspiracy that shattered his moral compass. His words painted a portrait of a man trapped by desire and guilt, a pawn in a game far darker than he had imagined. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Margaret never admitted guilt. She portrayed herself as a victim of a conspiracy, accusing her daughters of greed and ambition. Her defense was a masterclass in manipulation, appealing to societal expectations of women as fragile and incapable of such calculated cruelty. Yet the physical evidence was irrefutable. Arsenic was found hidden throughout Ravenscraft Manor in her bedroom, the kitchen even sewn into the lining of her favorite coat. The jury's verdict was swift and unanimous: guilty. Margaret Aldridge was sentenced to death by hanging, a rare and shocking punishment for a woman in Victorian America. On the day of her execution, she walked to the gallows with the same cold composure that had defined her life, dressed in her finest black silk and showing no emotion beyond a faint irritation at the crowd's behavior. Her final moments were a haunting testament to a woman who had wielded power with ruthless precision until the very end. Charles Whitfield received a sentence of 20 years for his role in the conspiracy, though he served only 12 before succumbing to consumption in prison. His final letter to Elalonina was a plea for forgiveness and a hope that she might find peace beyond the shadows he had helped cast over her life. Elalonina and Catherine inherited what remained of the Aldridge fortune, but the scars of betrayal ran deep. They chose to leave Newport behind, selling Ravenscraft Manor and seeking new lives far from the whispers and judgment of their past. Elalonina never married, dedicating herself to helping women escape dangerous domestic situations, while Catherine found solace in family and quiet obscurity. The trial of Margaret Aldridge sent shockwaves through Newport society, challenging the era's assumptions about women, motherhood, and morality. It exposed a fragile veneer of respectability that often masked darker truths and forced a reckoning with the capacity for evil hidden behind the most trusted faces. Today, the legacy of Ravenscraft Manor lingers like a ghost, an enduring reminder that power, when wielded without conscience, can corrupt absolutely. The story of Margaret Aldridge is not just a tale of murder and betrayal. It is a cautionary chronicle of how ambition and desperation can twist love into something monstrous, and how the darkest secrets often dwell where we least expect them. In the quiet aftermath of Ravenscraft Manor's horrors, we are left to grapple with unsettling questions about the nature of love, power, and the masks we wear. Margaret Aldridge's story forces us to confront a chilling paradox. The woman who should have been the ultimate protector became the most dangerous predator. What drives a mother to murder her own children's futures, to poison the very blood she bore? Is it desperation, ambition, madness, or something darker, lurking beneath the surface of maternal love? Society often cloaks women, especially mothers, in a halo of innocence and selflessness. We expect nurturing, sacrifice, and unconditional care. But what happens when those expectations become a prison? A role twisted into obsession and control? Margaret's cold calculation shatters the comforting myth of motherhood as pure and sacred, revealing how love can mutate into something monstrous when entwined with power and fear. This story also challenges us to look beyond appearances. The Aldridge family's polished facade hid a deadly secret, reminding us that evil often wears the most familiar faces. How many predators walk unnoticed within the very families we trust? Could you recognize such darkness in your own home? Or would it be masked by charm, duty, or fear? As you reflect on this tale, consider the fragile line between love and possession, protection and control. What forces might push someone to betray their own blood? And how do we, as a society, confront the uncomfortable truths hidden behind respectability and tradition? We invite you to share your thoughts below. Have you ever sensed a hidden darkness in someone close to you? What do you believe drives a mother to commit such unthinkable acts? Join the conversation. Your insights help us all understand the complex shadows that dwell within human nature.